So I'm going to make an assumption that if you're watching this, you probably go to church somewhere. Maybe you work as a leader or you're a staff member in your church and you're looking for something to help your church win. Or maybe you're a volunteer and you feel obligated to watch this. Well, hopefully they've included some snacks or gift cards because they appreciate you. If not, you should confront them. Or maybe you're just someone who goes to your church and you aren't volunteering at all. But somehow you've been tricked into watching this by someone who hopes you will start helping them do what they do. Either way, I have spent most of my life leading and working in the church, and I'm convinced one of the most important things any of us can do is to help the local church in our community win. So, whatever role you play in the church, I'm grateful you're watching this. In the course of this series, I am probably going to say a few things that will seem obvious to you. But if I can only have a little bit of your time, if I could only talk about a few things that I think really matter, this would be the list of things I would talk about. I actually wrote the book, A New Kind of Leader, because a pastor of a church asked me if I could summarize what I felt like were the most important things for a church to know. If I only had a few minutes to talk to his elders and deacons and volunteers, what would I want to say? So I spent a few months and wrote the shortest book I've ever written, simply hoping it would be short enough for you to actually read. And then I decided, just in case you wouldn't read it, that I would talk about it on this video. Because I just don't want you to miss what I think really matters when it comes to helping your church grow or indirectly to help your community win. So I made a list of 7 things that I hope I can convince you to believe. And they're really not that profound. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty confident that when I hand you any one of these principles, most of you will think, I already know that. Of course I believe that. But I'm going to push you a little because I don't want you to just believe them. I want you to do something about them. Think about this. Your church doesn't grow because you believe something. Your church grows when you do something about what you believe. The reason I know this is true is because I know a lot of churches who genuinely believe that God exists, they believe the Bible is true, and they are emphatic about believing the gospel. And guess what? They closed their doors and sold their buildings. It wasn't because they didn't believe, it's because they didn't act on what they believed. So are you ready? Let's have a conversation about what really matters in your church. And let's challenge each other to think about it in terms so that we can say what we believe in such a way that it moves us to do something about it. Sometimes we just need to be reminded because it's easy to get distracted. It's easy to get preoccupied doing what doesn't really matter. I mean, can I say that? Is it okay to just agree that some things matter more than others, especially when it comes to influencing the community around your church? As a matter of fact, I can promise you, if you will do something about the list I'm about to give you, you will make a different kind of impact in your community. The reason I know it's easy to get distracted is because even the disciples got distracted and forgot what really mattered. They were so busy doing important work, they got a little self-centered. They got their priorities mixed up. They actually needed an attitude adjustment one specific day when they missed a critical opportunity. So Jesus did something specific to remind them about something that matters. It just so happens that what Jesus said that day has the potential to radically change your church. After the disciples had completely ignored and dismissed a group of children as insignificant, Jesus physically put a child in front of them and made this statement. Whoever welcomes a child in my name welcomes me. Jesus was basically saying how you treat kids is a reflection of how you treat me. Or stated another way, if you don't want to miss God, then pay attention to the kids around you. Okay, so here's your first profound and earth-shattering principle. Kids matter. I know you already know that, right? But let's talk about that for a few minutes. If that's true, then that means the kids at your house matter. And the kids at your neighbor's house matter. Kids who go to your church matter. And kids who don't go to your church matter. The kids in your town matter. The kids who go to the elementary school matter. Here's the big question though. Do you act like kids matter? Notice what I didn't ask. Not do you believe kids matter, but do you act like kids matter? You see, the problem wasn't that the disciples didn't believe that kids matter. If you had asked them, they would have said, of course, sure, we believe kids matter. But that's not the question. Do you act like kids matter? You see, this is a personal question for you. The question is not, are there volunteers in your church that act like kids matter? Are there educators that act like kids matter? The question is, do you act like kids matter? This is also a practical question for your church. Does your church's behavior, priorities, energy, budget, prove that kids matter. Now I'm going to push the issue a little harder. Remember, I warned you that I would do that. So every time I tell you what matters, I'm going to add a qualifier to hopefully convince you how or how much it matters. So I'm going to say something that could seem a little controversial. Not only do kids matter, but kids matter more than adults. I know, that sounds like I'm saying the value of a kid's life is worth more than the value of an adult's life. But before you discredit the idea as too radical, think about it. Even your dog figures this out pretty quickly whenever a new baby arrives at the house. I'm not trying to devalue any human at any stage of life. The statement isn't intended to imply that an adult's life has any less value than a kid's life, nor that the world should in any way revolve around a child. But what it does suggest is that if you want to affect the way a generation sees the world, then it makes sense to start influencing their character and faith when they're young. And what I'm suggesting when it comes to the priorities of a church or the priorities of a community is this, and see if you agree. What you do for kids matters more than what you do for adults. I'm not saying what you do for adults is not important. I'm just suggesting the younger you start investing in coaching and teaching kids, the more impact it will make in their life later. Every expert agrees that the first 18 years of a person's life are extremely crucial in laying a foundation for their future. Because of that, we think each phase from birth through adolescence has distinctive opportunities you can leverage to influence a kid's future. Sue Gerhardt, a researcher on emotional health in children, says it this way: the brain of a child is built up through actual experiences. What you put in is more or less what you get out. That's why what you do for a kid is like investing. It gains shares. The sooner you start paying in, the greater the return will be later. The longer you wait, the less you earn. Simply put, making deposits in someone's life while they're young will earn more interest over time. That's why we use a backpack to illustrate the principle. Imagine if you waited until a child became an adult before you taught him or her to read. Parents who want their children to become educated adults enroll their kids in school. What if you waited until your child was an adult to teach them healthy habits? The things that are happening in their life today will be the things that they carry with them for the rest of their life. No wonder governments pass common sense laws to ensure the educational and physical well-being of the average child. Why? Because what happens to kids matters more. When you wait until they're adults, the gains are slower. So, as far as your church programs go, the same is also true. Make no mistake, I'm definitely implying that what you do for kids and teenagers is more important than what you do for older adults. Okay, before an older adult makes you turn this off, just think about this for a few minutes longer. I know this seems radical, and it could be that the people who actually pay the bills get offended because I'm really suggesting that you use more of your resources and money for kids and less for those who actually give the money. I know there's only so much pie to go around, and if you cut off a bigger slice for your kids in student ministry, then maybe another age group loses. Or do they? Here's an interesting piece of research by Fuller in their new book for churches called Growing Young. They address this issue directly with data. According to their research, when churches give a bigger slice of their resources to kids, other ministries don't get less, because something unusual happens when a kids ministry becomes a priority in your church. The pie actually gets bigger. So what you do for kids really does matter more. Here's another case for making kids matter. What you do for kids actually matters more than you think it does. The problem is we think what we do for kids doesn't matter as much because we can't see immediate results. We can't tell if it's working, right? But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. By the way, the reason you can't see spiritual growth is because it's spiritual. The reason you can't always predict a defining moment that's happening in a kid's life is because it's too gradual. What about this reason? What your church does for kids will keep your church from dying. Research shows that the age of the average church member increases by 7 years every decade. In the next 10 years, the average age of many mainline denominations will be over 60. At the same time, the average age of a church member is 15 years older than the surrounding community members. Basically, churches are graying because members are getting older and younger families are just not attending. Well, the only way to reverse the trend is, guess what? To reach more kids. That's one reason you might consider opening the door a little wider for kids in your community, just to make sure that the doors of your church are never permanently closed. That's what Dalton Baptist Church near Scranton, Pennsylvania did a few years ago. There were barely a dozen senior adults left attending the church, so they voted to do something unusual. Instead of letting their church age out of existence, they donated their building to some teenagers from a church up the street. When asked why they did it, one of the elders simply replied, "We believe it's our mission to keep the doors open." Here's another one. What your church does for kids will keep Sunday more interesting. Imagine the difference in a church that has kids and teenagers and the church that doesn't. Trust me, a church that has kids will love deeper, think smarter, teach better, laugh louder, and pray harder. What about this idea? What your church does for kids will make adults better Christians. I think that might have been exactly what Jesus was implying when he said, "When you welcome a child, you welcome me." I don't want you to miss kids because I don't want you to miss me. My experience has been when more adults start showing up for kids, something actually happens to the adults. Kids have a way of reminding us what matters. Kids have a way of stretching our faith. Kids have a way of giving us an opportunity to demonstrate unconditional love. And here's one more thing. What your church does for kids will change how they see God. And please don't skip over this. This is important. Jeffrey Canada is a hero of mine. He grew up in Harlem, believing that one day Superman would come and rescue him. He said the saddest day of his life was when he found out Superman wasn't real and that Superman wasn't coming. So you know what he did? He somehow made it through the Harlem days, went to Harvard, got his degree, and came back to Harlem to become Superman to a lot of kids. One day I was visiting with him and he asked me this question: "Why do you think there's so many kids in Harlem that don't believe in God?" I said, "I don't know. What do you think?" He said, "Well, it's simple. Because there's so many kids in Harlem that have never been around adults who are godlike." Here's the point. You may be the best chance some kids have to see God. That's why I'm glad you're listening to this, because we need more adults who will show up for kids and act like kids matter. There are a lot of ways you could do that. I'm sure your church will be glad to give you some direction, but maybe until then you should simply decide that you will do what someone did for you. Or maybe you need to decide you will do what you wish someone had done for you. Or maybe you simply just need to decide that you will do what you hope someone will do for your kid or grandkid one day. I mean, let's pretend I was your pastor. I know that's a scary thought, but if I were, here's what I might say. No one can volunteer for anything anymore in this church until we have enough leaders for kids and teenagers. Or I'd say something like this: we're going to cancel Sunday morning adult classes so you no longer have an excuse not to show up for kids. Or if you haven't volunteered in this church for over 2 years, maybe you need to go to another church because we don't know how to help you grow if you don't show up and serve. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have to say any of those things, and you should just do one of the following. If you're not volunteering, start. I bet you knew that was coming, didn't you? There's just too much at stake to not have a consistent leader in every kid or teenager's life. And here's something else. If you are volunteering some, consider volunteering more. Try to have weekly influence in a kid's life, because that's how you build real history with someone. And besides, I promise, getting more involved will change you more than them. Oh, and one more thing. If you are volunteering a lot, then go find someone else to volunteer. Don't make your church leaders assume the responsibility to find all the leaders. You have a network. Write down the name of someone who can do what you're doing and convince them that kids matter and that what you do for kids matters more than they ever imagined.